Kansas City, but you can call me KC.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Alegria in Kansas City. I'm your host, Fabian Shepard, and we're glad you could join us today. As you know, here on this program, we aim to educate, inform, and inspire you. Today, we're going to offer you some information and a little bit of education. We've got a fantastic guest, and we're going to talk a little bit about the uniqueness of 2020 and 2021 and how the pandemic affected certain members of our society. Our guest today is the Director of Johnson County Mental Health Department, Tim DeWeese. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Fabian.
Well, so I want to begin with you because I know a little bit about the Johnson County Mental Health Department, but I don't think our audience knows a lot about you.
Okay.
So where did you go to school?
So I first went to school. I got my bachelor's degree in psychology from Missouri Southern State University, which is in the southern part of Missouri, and went there, got my degree in psychology and minor in military science. And from there, I went to work. I owed some time with the Army, went to work for a comprehensive mental health center in Independence, Missouri as a case manager. And I've been working in community mental health center service ever since then.
Okay, so we've known one another, but I didn't know that about you.
Yes.
So where were you? Independence has an Army center?
No, Independence. I owed the military some time for school. I went through ROTC and moved to Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
Was there for a while, and then didn't go full time. Stayed in the reserves. So my first job out of college and out of the military was at Comprehensive Mental Health Center, which is in Independence, Missouri. And that's a community mental health center here in the Kansas City metropolitan area.
Okay. So now you're the director, but did you start with Johnson County Mental Health as the director, or did you have another position?
No, so I started in 1995 in Johnson County, and started there as a team leader for crisis services. And I feel like I'm fortunate in that I have the opportunity to lead the organization that I grew up in. And so I've only worked at two places, Comprehensive Mental Health Center. I worked for a brief time at the Guidance Center in Leavenworth, and then the rest of my 25 years have been at Johnson County Mental Health Center.
That's got to be a treat.
Absolutely.
To be in one place and then another place for the rest of your career.
Very fortunate.
And I know that you have a big team around you and you've got some really skilled and talented people there. Can you talk about the support staff that you have in Johnson County?
Absolutely. We have about 340 total FTEs, so total staff, and we provide a wide range of services to the community, to individuals that have serious mental illness. And we have some folks that when they come to Johnson County, one of the things that I learned early on is that if you wanted to make a difference in your community, Johnson County Mental Health Center was the place to be. So it only really took me 5 years to figure that out and try to get a job at Johnson County. And so we have people who join our team and they stay with us for a long time.
So I know that. I do know that many people stay with you for a long time, and I know that many people appreciate the type of leader that you are. I've actually been able to witness that, and so I want to congratulate you on some of the things I've heard. I recently heard from someone that they had a child who had some issue. I don't know what the issue is, and they needed an appointment. And they were able to get a same-day appointment for their child?
Absolutely. So one of the things that historically, one of the things that's been important for me over the course of my career is to learn from situations that didn't feel right. And so one of the things that historically has been frustrating about the mental health system to me is that when people gain the courage to ask for help, they typically call the mental health center. And most mental health centers or most providers are going to say, well, we'll get you in for an intake and that'll be about a week away. And then if you come in and you see the person, they say, okay, well, we recommend that you maybe get on medications. And so then an appointment with a psychiatrist could even be 6 to 8 weeks longer from that. So the notion and my thought is that we really have to be able to provide services to individuals when they need it. And so being able to provide same-day access both for mental health care as well as psychiatric care was really important. So when I became the director 6 years ago, that was one of the first things that I wanted to make sure we were able to accomplish, is that we were able to get same-day service for people.
And that is very helpful when people are in a crisis moment.
Absolutely. I think that the sooner that you can intervene, the sooner that you can help with someone, the more positive the outcome's going to be. I will say one of the things that is interesting is that when you look at mental illness, the period from onset of illness to first services is typically 8 to 10 years. Within our country. And so what we really need to do is shrink that. We need to be able to, when people have symptoms of illness, whether that be young children or even in adulthood or young adulthood, we need to be able to intervene at that point in time. What we know today is that major mental illness is preventable, but we have to take prophylactic interventions and preventative efforts to be able to get involved with people much sooner than we are today.
Very good. And I know that there have been some changes. You've augmented this whole system in your time as the director. And one of those real distinguishing changes is transportation. Can you tell me a little bit about that, what you've done to make that work?
Absolutely. One of the things that is a barrier for people getting any kind of health care, whether that be mental health care or physical health care, is the ability to get around and be able to get to those appointments as they need to. So we created a transportation service. The interesting point about the transportation services is that we hired many of our own clients. So we developed a peer support, a peer model of transportation. And that way, what we do is we're able to provide job experience. We're able to provide training to individuals that are maybe further along in their recovery to be able to help other people get to their appointments. And so one example is that, we have a difficult time with someone. We go to pick them up and they're crying. Well, and they're just not wanting to go to their appointment or going to the job. The individuals that are driving, they've been through that. They've lived that experience, and so they can talk with them about that. If you're calling Uber or a cab, they're not going to worry about that. They're just going to drive on. What we have is that peer support model where a peer whose lived experience is the same as yours is picking you up and taking you to those appointments. And we've seen some really good success from that.
I love that. I really love that idea, because that's what it's all about. It's all about us helping one another. And this is a case where you actually see it applied.
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that is underrated is the healing power of human connection. And anytime we can connect as human beings, that is when we're going to see people live more positive lifestyles. They're going to recover, and they're going to live healthier, because people care. When people care about you, and you know that people care about you, then really magical things can happen when that happens.
Well, and the authenticity rings true. So folks, think about that. If you know someone in need, at Johnson County Mental Health, you have the ability to get same-day service. And we're not worried about fees, are we?
No.
So the cost is not a factor. Johnson County Mental Health is really seriously interested in helping individuals with mental health issues. And if transportation's an issue, transportation can be provided. So keep that in mind. Now, I want to also talk to you about this pandemic, this thing we've had for the last 2 years now,
right.
Or it seems like 2 years, seems actually like an eternity. How has that affected individuals in Johnson County? Have we seen more need for mental health services?
We've absolutely seen more need, and I think that its impact, I get asked this question all the time, and it certainly impacts everyone, but it impacts everyone's differently. So what we have to remember is that what you're experiencing, what I'm experiencing, or what any other person's experiencing, that's their experience. And we need to be mindful of that so that we can provide a little grace and understanding, because we're all experiencing this in different ways. We are seeing an increase in mental health needs, and we see that increasing. Fortunately, we haven't seen in Johnson County an increase in the deaths by suicide. We've actually seen that reduce. I'm more concerned, and what I continue to share with people is that I believe that we've been in survival mode. So while we're going through this pandemic, the 12 or 14 months that the pandemic's been going on, we've been in survival mode, surviving a pandemic, managing the impacts of the pandemic. What I'm more concerned about is once we begin to recover, once we begin to go back, quote, to normal, or once we begin to have things loosen up, or maybe we're doing more things and more people are being vaccinated, what I think is going to happen, and what I fear is going to happen, is that people are going to all of a sudden realize that the past 14 months has been hard, and they're going to take a reflective look back on that. And anytime anyone experiences some level of trauma, there's a level of need that needs to go along with that. And so I think that we're going to see people really have difficulty with the trauma that we've experienced over the last 12 to 14 months. And so I'm worried that the next 6 months is going to even require us to have to provide more services. I've likened it to being on a boat. When you're in a boat and you're going, you're going kind of at a moderate speed, there's a wake that kind of guides behind you. But when you stop, that wake kind of pulls up and the boat starts to rise. If you're too heavy, water sometimes even flows into the inside. What I'm fearful of is that this wake is about to hit the mental health system and we're not prepared.
I understand. But you don't strike me as having a staff that is very unprepared. I've seen that you've had to face several challenges. One of those is teenage suicide. That has seemed like it's become an epidemic across the country, but it really has hit us hard in Johnson County.
It has. I mean, we noticed that there was really an epidemic of youth suicide in our community roughly in 2016. And so we really put into place in 2016 some efforts to really mitigate and to disrupt youth suicides. And we developed a campaign called 0 Reasons Why. Yes. And the 0 Reasons Why campaign was really about students, young people, telling us adults what they needed to help disrupt suicides among their peers. And so that has been one of that's been one of the things that I've been most proud of over the last 6 years is really being able to do that work with these young people and to help develop a plan so that they can communicate with their peers and fellow students about the importance of mental health, about mental wellness, and to see that really there's 0 reasons why suicide should even be an option. And so I think that since we did that, I think it really created a level of resilience within our community so that when 2020 hit and we have the pandemic, we have the social unrest, we have some of the polarization that exists within our communities, our young people have been really resilient. I think for the most part, what I see is a lot of adults are having a much more difficult time than the young people.
And that will take us to break because I want to come back and I want to talk to you about the effect on the different age demographics. Absolutely. So we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we'll have more with Johnson County Mental Health Director Tim DeWeese.
Why did the onion cry? I don't know. Why did the onion cry? 'Cause he cut himself. I've got one. Why was the Cyclops such a good teacher? I don't know. Why was the Cyclops such a good teacher? Because he only had one pupil.
Hey, welcome back to Alegria in Kansas City. I'm your host, Fabian Shepard, and today we're speaking with Johnson County Mental Health Director Tim DeWeese. When we left and went to break, we were talking about how people respond to this pandemic. One of the questions I want to ask you about, because I'm a father of young children, how are the young children dealing with this? Are you getting Any calls for help with smaller individuals?
Yeah, so absolutely, we're getting an increased number of calls for young people. Like I said earlier, our far majority calls are from adults, but we certainly are getting some calls from young people. And I think the transition to virtual learning, those kinds of things, has been difficult for many kids. That's why I said early on is that one experience is one experience. So while there are kids that are having a really difficult time with virtual learning and stay-at-home learning, there are other kids that are flourishing. And so what we have to do is find out what is impacting each family unit, and then begin to build a plan on how we can support each one of them, because it's all going to be different. It's not, we can't really necessarily take a cookie cutter approach or generalize across the entire population, just simply because every individual family unit and every individual young person is going to experience this much differently. Some kids are going to really miss being around other kids and interacting with other kids, and that's where they get their energy from. And there's other kids that, you know, are a little more introverted, and they may be able to do much better with the structure that virtual learning has created. So it really depends upon each individual child. But we've seen a host across the board need additional assistance, both from the positive changes and in regards to the negative impacts that it's had on individuals and in the individual family units.
And you know, something I've learned from this, watching my children try to learn virtually or remotely, is that I'd had the wrong idea. I took some classes, remote classes, virtual classes, and I thought, boy, you've got to really be disciplined to do this. I don't know that it has so much with discipline. I think it's foreign to us. We are social creatures.
It's very, I would totally agree. I think it's very different. And that's why we've seen, you know, we've had virtually learning or homeschool for a long time, and there's no studies out there that says that homeschooling versus in-person class or public school or private school is any better. I think the bottom line is that each child learns differently, and I think that what we have to do is find a way to make sure that we're helping each child maximize their potential. And so I don't think anybody would argue that for the majority of kids, in-person learning is the best approach. And we got to find a way to make sure that we do that safely. And then we also have to be able to maneuver around any other kids that may have a different experience.
So societally, we know that there's a dichotomy between children and adults and the way things affect them emotionally. There's a maturity difference there. How is it affecting the various demographic groups? Do you see something more with people in their 20s and 30s than you see with seniors? Is there a dichotomy that you're noticing these trends?
Yeah, I think that from my experience, and again, this is just my experience and what I've seen through the work that we've done at the Mental Health Center. So I'm definitely not speaking for everyone or every mental health professional. My experience is that young people and young adults have actually done fairly well in adapting. And if we think about it, the brain biology, when you're young, your brain is still learning, and it's changing all the time. And so adapting to change is a little bit easier for young people. Middle-aged adults, after you reach the age about 28 to middle age about 50, it's a little bit harder. We hear that notion that you can't teach old dogs new tricks.
Right.
Change is hard for all of us, and it brings out a lot of emotion. It causes a stress and anxiety, and so I think that's what we're seeing. I think we see a lot of stress and anxiety within some of the parents, and then that has to have a impact on the family system as well. Beyond that, when we look at older adults, probably the largest group that I'm most worried about are those individuals who are just beyond that retirement age. but living alone by themselves. That is a group that we've seen a slight uptick in deaths by suicide, and I think that just goes to the whole notion of isolation. These are folks that may have been receiving Meals on Wheels, and that was temporarily stopped, or they only stopped by once a week to deliver a week of meals. So I think that's really important that we think about that population. And it goes back to something I should have mentioned earlier. One of the things that I think was really important, in that if we had to change what we did at the start of the pandemic, was to message it a little bit different. We said that we needed to stay socially distanced, mask up and stay socially distant. And I would argue that we didn't need to stay socially distant. We needed to stay physically apart, but socially connected to everyone.
I like that.
That is what really helps us get through things, is when we're connected with one another. And so we were given the message, stay socially distant. And actually what we should have been saying is stay physically distant, but socially connected with the people around you.
Even with you just saying it there, it resonates well in my brain, hearing that physically distant.
And I think one of the things that I found is that young people have learned to manage that a little bit better, is they've, and whether that's because of technology or whatever, they've been able to stay physically distanced from people, but they've learned how to stay socially connected.
I understand that. So when you have things, you mentioned emotions that come into play. When you have things like this going on, sometimes those negative emotions can manifest themselves in ways that might require intervention. Mm-hmm. And have you had people where law enforcement has had to get involved, and then they come to you not of their own volition?
Absolutely. There's the first thing that I would say is that those emotional reactions are normal. When we experience trauma, or when we experience things like the global pandemic, we're going to have natural reactions. We're going to have natural emotions. It's when those emotions or those symptoms, that anxiety, that depression, become more evident and more prominent in your day in and day out, and they begin to affect how you interact with people around you, maybe people within your family. That's when you really need to reach out for help. And absolutely, I think it's had an impact on law enforcement. I think it's had an impact on educators, and we've had to utilize the police departments in a lot of ways are social workers on the front lines. They often come in contact with people who are struggling, not only just breaking the law or doing something criminal, but so many times they're coming in contact with people that are just not having a good day, or that are experiencing some increased depression or anxiety, or maybe they're under the influence. And we have to rely upon those law enforcement officers to know the difference and to be able to get people help.
Well, in that type of mental distress, we see it manifest itself in other ways, the homelessness and addiction, as you mentioned. Absolutely. One of the things that we have a benefit of in Johnson County that I think is just a great model for the rest of the nation is the co-responders. And I did have Attorney General Schmidt on this very program, and he talked about that, and he really sang the praises of Johnson County and how we're utilizing that. Would you please explain what a co-responder is and how that works?
Absolutely. So when I first joined Johnson County, I was part of the crisis case management team, and my deputy director, who's now my deputy director, Susan Rome, she came up with the idea, and it was from a lot of feedback from police. They said, it's great for us to be able to call you at 2 o'clock in the morning and you come out, but what if you were with us? What if we put boots on the ground? And the more I began to think about that, and the more I listened to Susan talk about that, the more what we were really talking about is access. So we already talked about same-day access. This is immediate access. When someone's having a behavioral health issue, we have boots on the ground with the police officer to be able to manage the situation, make sure it's safe, and then be able, from a social work perspective, be able to handle the crisis, the behavioral health crisis, whatever that might be. So embedding a licensed mental health professional within the police department so that they ride along together and they respond to calls. That is access. And one of the things that we know is that when you provide access to service, you do it in a quality way, you contain costs across the system. And containing costs is important because when you're able to do that, you don't have people going to the ER needlessly. You don't have people arrested and going to jail needlessly. So really, when you are able to provide mental health care at the point in time someone needs it, you're actually saving the system, across the system, money. And you can then take that money and reinvest it back into other services. That I think is the most important thing, and the co-responder program is a perfect example of that.
Well, and besides quantifying it in just the dollars and cents, the quality of life for the community.
Absolutely.
And you actually are able to expand. I've seen it grow. I've witnessed this, and I've really appreciated it. Now it's not just the county level, but municipalities are involved.
Absolutely.
How many municipalities now have co-responders with their...
So in Johnson County, we have every municipality. There's 26 municipalities in Johnson County. All of them have access to a co-responder, and we also have co-responders through the Sheriff's Department for all the unincorporated areas. Now, every city doesn't have their own co-responders. So, for example, the small cities up in the northeastern part of Johnson County all share a co-responder. But then the larger cities, say for example Overland Park or Olathe, they have 3 co-responders. Shawnee, Lenexa, they have 2 co-responders. So it really depends upon their need. And quite frankly, if you listen to the chiefs and the cities, they believe that they could actually use more. And I suspect that we'll see that happen over time.
Well, and that's important that some of those municipalities have more than one, because then you have broader coverage.
Absolutely.
Do you have 24-hour coverage in most places?
Right now in Overland Park, I would say Overland Park, it being the largest city, it has 3, and it has the most coverage of any city. So we'll continue to build upon each of those other cities, but right now we have 24-hour coverage in the city of Overland Park with the addition of that position. And we'll continue to move towards that. That's also a juggling match to figure out how you can make sure that you have the right number of people. And so you have to really look at the data and make good informed decisions based upon what the call data is telling you and those kinds of things, so that you are not necessarily having overstaffed, but you're staffed up enough. And we're not quite to the point where we need to be, but I feel confident that over the next year or so, we'll be able to reach where if someone needs a co-responder, they'll have access to it.
Great. And you get a lot of support from the Board of County Commissioners in that, right?
Absolutely. That's the other reason I mentioned this. I mentioned earlier that one of the things that I learned was if you wanted to make a difference in your community, move to Johnson County, and that's what I did after 5 years at Comprehensive. The other thing about that is that the community, the elected officials in Johnson County understand the importance of a good safety net mental health system. They understand the importance it is for our community. It's important to the citizens. And I think it not only is it the right thing to do, but physically it's the best thing to do, because again, if you provide those quality services, you're able to provide services to people and limit their need for more expensive services down the road. And so, the county itself, the citizens of the communities support the mental health center, and our elected officials support the mental health center. So it's kind of, in my view, the best of both worlds.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win, and that's why I've been there for 25 years.
Well, and that explains a lot. So we only have a few more minutes left. And in that time, I want you to tell me a little bit about some of the successes that you've had, or anything that surprised you.
I think that, like I said, one of the biggest thing for me was developing the co-responders. Something else that I thought was really important when I became the director was that we needed to move upstream. And what I mean by that is that we need to look at how we can prevent some of the major mental illnesses from ever happening. And so we've started something called ABC, which is a intervention with young mothers and their infants to really teach that connection and bring that connection together. And really the research is pretty amazing in that if you're able to help that, what you're doing is teaching not only the mother about healthy interactions and healthy relationships, but you're supporting that baby so that maybe that they don't need the level of care that maybe they would need if they hadn't had that. Now, the problem with that is that type of proactive intervention is hard to prove. I think it will take some time.
Because you're dealing with babies.
Because you're dealing with babies and you don't know what's going to happen, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. But I think that the more intervention that we can take, the more we can intervene early with school-age kids and with toddlers, the better off we're going to be.
So to that point, I know that maybe I heard it from you, but I've heard this, that some of these things are generational. And so is there ever a time where, and I don't want to get really crazy with this, but is there ever a time where the mental health department has to intercede and maybe say, okay, this environment, this family unit is not healthy for this young person, and maybe be proactive in getting someone help away from the rest of the family?
So I think that really, that serves as, there's the Division of Children's Services within the state, and they really play that role. From a treatment standpoint, from a mental health provider standpoint, it's going to be very hard for me to give up on a family unit. I'm going to have to feel like I've done everything that I possibly can do. Yes, there are intergenerational issues, but things like ABC, that's an intergenerational approach.
Right.
Not only are you teaching that young mother, but you're also teaching that infant about healthy relationships and building attachments. And again, it gets back to that whole notion that I talked about, the healing power of human connection. Mm-hmm. We connect as human beings, we're going to be healthy. Not only mentally healthy, but we're going to probably live physically healthy lives too.
I love that. So where can people who need help that are watching right now go? Website, phone number? Can you help us with that?
Absolutely. So individuals that are needing assistance in Johnson County, the easiest way that you can get a hold of us is through our 24-hour crisis line. We staff that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There is no wrong call. Even if you live in the Kansas City metropolitan area and you don't know where to turn in your community, call us. We'll direct you to the right place. And that number is 268-0156.
So that's 913-268-0156 for Johnson County Mental Health.
Absolutely. And so that is the easiest way for us to get assistance. And like I said, there's no wrong calls. I think it's important that people across the Kansas City metropolitan area know that there are community mental health centers in every part of the United States and in every community. In Johnson County, we serve Johnson County, but over on the Missouri side, in Jackson County, there are 4 community mental health centers, and they provide services to different parts of Jackson County. And so I think you have to find where your community mental health center is, and they can provide you the assistance or at least guide you in the direction to be able to connect with the right level of care.
Okay, and I also, one last thing, I know that trying to find you sometimes, you're a very busy man, and you have offices at these different locations. Are there 5 locations?
We actually now have 4 primary locations in Johnson County.
Okay. Are they equally dispersed across the county?
Yes. So we have one in the northeast part of the county that's in Mission. We have one that's in Shawnee, and then we have one that's in Olathe. And I would guess, and actually we have a campus with 2 facilities in Shawnee. So that's the four primary locations. I would eventually say that before I retire, we'll probably have a facility in the southern part of the county, and that will provide us a place in every part of the county so that it's easily accessible for everyone.
That's so great. That's so great. I want to thank you, Tim, for everything that you've been doing and I know the citizens appreciate it. Is there anything parting that you want folks to know, other than, of course, that phone number, if you would repeat it, and anything else about access to care?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing that I would say is that during this time, it's important for us to provide a little grace, kindness, and understanding to one another. Ask individuals how they're doing, listen and support them, and if they need assistance, help them reach out for help. In Johnson County, you can do that by calling us at 268-0156.
Again, that's 913-268-0156 for Johnson County Mental Health. If you know somebody or you yourself need help with that, Tim and his staff will be happy to help you. So that brings us to the close of another Alegria in Kansas City. I want to thank you for joining us. Tim, this has been very informative. I want to thank you for joining us. And remember that Alegria in Kansas City is brought to you by Televida, a production of Exo Films. We will see you next time.